I'm Yasmin, and this is BoomGenTV's Daily Update number 14. Over the past few days, thousands of protesters have descended on New York City to rally against Iran's president. I spoke with a lot of them, and they brought up many different issues. Now, to wrap my head around all of it, I spoke with Arang Keshavarzian. He's a professor of Middle Eastern Studies at NYU. Hi, Arang. Thanks for talking to us today.
Thank you for having me.
What do you make of Russian President Dmitry Medvedev's recent change of heart a little bit? He basically sort of promised to Obama that he now would consider increasing economic sanctions on Iran.
Yeah, from the perspective of Obama and the United States, this shows that his diplomatic tactic, his compromise on the missiles in Europe, are paying dividends. But it's going to be a lot of negotiations, and of course China again, I believe today reiterated that they were uncomfortable with the notions of ratcheting up sanctions. But I'm sure in the coming weeks there's going to be more and more negotiations amongst these powers, and it's part of this is kind of completely out of the hands of the Islamic Republic.
What do you think economic sanctions would do to a country like Iran right now?
I agree with the sentiment of a lot of the people in front of the UN that sanctions really are not the best strategy, because they will, in fact, weaken Iranian society, they'll hurt ordinary Iranians economically primarily, and in fact will probably strengthen very factions of Iranian polity that are the most hawkish, specifically members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps that are both involved in crackdown on the protesters, but also heavily involved in various economic and commercial sectors, will benefit from this more closed Iranian economy, which would give even greater privileges.
You know, the economic sanctions are sort of one of those talking points and issues that's dividing a lot of the protesters here in New York City, from what I've seen. So can you talk to me a little bit about these divides that we're seeing within these protesters?
Most importantly is this divide between those who take a very hawkish position in terms of sanctions, in terms of regime change. They're closely aligned with organizations such as AIPAC, do have a more militaristic view towards U.S.-Iran relations, and versus groups associated with Voices for Iran, which are trying to, I would say, predominantly reflect the political attitudes and wishes within the Green movement within Iran. So they're very upfront about criticizing sanctions, distancing themselves from military attacks and the language of regime change, and restrict their criticism of Ahmadinejad on the grounds the handling of the elections and the handling of post-election protests.
What do you think that the international community was saying when they did walk out of the assembly hall? So what's sort of the message that they're driving home, do you think?
I think we should be careful not to make too much of this that international community or Iranians protesters are challenging the legitimacy of Ahmadinejad. I'm one of those who believes that the whole concept of legitimacy is a somewhat slippery one. I don't think governments necessarily stay in power because they're legitimate, and they don't necessarily fall from power because they're illegitimate. Many illegitimate governments, such as the apartheid regime in South Africa, for instance, can survive crises of legitimacy.
I sort of, while I'm out there watching these protests and talking to people, one question that keeps coming to my mind is, so what? Sort of, what's going to happen? What goes on from here? Where do we go from here?
I like to think that the large and brave outpouring of protesters in Iran last week helped fuel the excitement on the part of those protesters in the United States or in New York this week. So that in a sense, these protesters are feeding off of one another, and maybe in the coming weeks, protesters inside Iran will reflect on what happened in New York, the source of encouragement and energy, if you will. So that's one way it could work. The other way that I think is also important is it's important to remember that there are members of the political establishment of the Islamic Republic that in fact are concerned with Iran's image on the international international image and would like working relationships with the international community economically and so forth. So for them to see these images of an empty hall in an assembly when the president is speaking, where large protesters have come together protesting his visit, this makes them deeply uncomfortable.
Do you think that the United States President Obama should engage with Ahmadinejad right now?
This is a very difficult question. In part because if he doesn't engage or doesn't engage in deliberate discussions with Iran, does that mean that the other option is to attack invade Iran or Israel attack Iran? Obviously, personally, I'm opposed to that strategy. So for much of the past several years, I've argued that the US should engage with Iran. However, like some of these protesters inside the UN, I'd also like to see that the engagement with Iran should not be solely be centered on nuclear and economic issues, and issues about human rights, civil liberties should be part of those discussions and discussions.
Thank you very much for talking to us, Arang.
Thank you very much for having me.